G'day, eh? My name's RJ, and welcome to Killer Canuck, a recurring segment here on RUE MORGUE TV. Success in the film industry often leads to an incumbent gold rush of rip-offs and imitators. Being frequently blessed with low budgets and basement expectations, the horror genre is the perfect candidate for this. The 1970s were hugely important for horror, producing several genre mainstays such as Jaws, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Halloween. William Friedkin's The Exorcist in '73 and Richard Donner's The Omen in '76 would heavily influence a tax shelter film made in Montreal. Let's take a look at 1977's Cathy's Curse. In 1963, Canada signed a co-production treaty with France, its first of many with different countries. This was prior to the foundation of the Canadian Film Development Corporation in 1967. With these treaties, Canada was able to produce films with the financial assistance of other countries. And we still continue to do this today, and Canada has since signed similar treaties with over 40 countries. Through Telefilm, Turbo Kid was a co-production with New Zealand, Possessor was a co-production with the United Kingdom, and Maps to the Stars was a co-production with Germany, just to name a few. Thrown into production after the success of The Omen in the summer of '76, Cathy's Curse was greenlit in November to be completed by December 31st. During the tax shelter era, producers would often wait until the winter and determine how well their year had been financially before deciding to invest in film. In 1974, in an effort to promote film production in Canada, the federal government increased something called the capital cost allowance from 60% to 100%. Basically, what that meant was between the years of 1975 and 1982, any money that was invested into Canadian film could be 100% deducted from the investor's taxable income. So what ends up happening is that anybody, not just film producers, anybody with a sizable chunk of money would throw it all into film production just to get the tax credit. The incentive worked. There were 3 feature films produced in Canada in 1974 before the tax credit was introduced, and at the height of the tax shelter era there were 77 produced in 1979. But the decade would go down in infamy for the simple fact that the majority of the films produced at that time were just garbage thrown together to save money. Many were films that weren't even made by artists, just people with money who didn't know the first thing about filmmaking. So the money for Cathy's Curse showed up just in time to shoot in the cold of Canadian winter. They actually had to put ice cubes in the actors' mouths for some scenes to try to tame their billowing breath. A co-production with France, Eddie Madelon was brought over from Paris to direct. The crew from France worked well with the local crew from Montreal, because they both spoke French, though some crew members only spoke English and there had to be some dissemination of information. Madelon said he felt right at home as soon as he arrived. This is probably why he decided to stay and shoot another Canada-France co-production, Blackout, the following year. Thanks to the Severin release of Cathy's Curse, there's now an easy way to watch both versions of the film that exist. The US theatrical release, which is the version that most people saw before its relatively recent rediscovery, and the director's cut. The theatrical version is a full 10 minutes shorter than the director's cut, which is pretty hefty considering the long version is already only 90 minutes. I'm going to be using the director's cut for this video because, to be frank, the theatrical version is a disjointed mess. Characters aren't introduced properly and so seemingly show up out of nowhere. Cathy's mother appears to snap at her daughter without any sense of motivation, and there's a massive time jump that's totally indiscernible. All of this, paired with some whack editing decisions, make for a certainly entertaining affair, but not one that makes a lot of sense. The director's cut of Cathy's Curse opens with a car pulling up to the front of a house, and boy, get used to that because it happens a lot in this movie. A man steps out and runs inside looking for his wife and children. He finds his daughter Laura upstairs, who explains to her father that his wife left and took their son George. And her dad sets the tone for the rest of the film with 4 simple words.
Your mother's a bitch.
They leave in the car they rode in on, but a white rabbit that was definitely on loan from a pet store hops across the road, causing them to swerve, crash, burn, and die. This vintage car was rented from a local collector for around $400. Eddie Madelon laments that the stunt work here is minimalist because the collector was actually on set the entire time as he was worried about them damaging it. Then we have a 30-year time jump. The movie doesn't tell you, you just have to know. A car pulls up to the front of the house, and out steps George Gimble, played by Alan Scarfy. At the time, Scarfy was predominantly a theater actor. He has since gone on to have a consistent career, mostly in television and TV movies. George is the son of a bitch who was spirited away in the night by his mother in the previous scene, making the ones who died in the car accident his father and sister. We're given some heavy-handed exposition explaining that he and his wife had previously lost their unborn child, in a conversation between the maid, Mary, played by Canadian actor Dorothy Davis, and Paul, the handyman, played by Canadian actor Roy Witham, both of whom had parts in David Cronenberg's Shivers in 1975. Dorothy Davis also had a bit part in another Canada-France co-production, The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane in 1976, which would star a then 13-year-old Jodie Foster, the same year she would appear in Taxi Driver. But more importantly, Davis co-founded the Montreal Children's Theatre in 1933 and helped run it for 60 years, from its foundation during the Great Depression until her death in 1993. The theatre is still in operation today and has since produced over 1,000 stage productions. George's wife Vivian, played by Beverly Murray, is in the back seat with their daughter Cathy. Cathy shoves the blankets off herself, and we see that she has somehow also moved the sheets on a bed in the house. The family gets reacquainted with Mary and Paul before heading inside. The furniture and knickknacks are all in the same position they were when George was a boy, including a statue that he gets friendly with.
My first love.
Maybe a little too friendly. Cathy explores the upstairs, while Vivian and George deliver some more sweet exposition.
You know and I know that I've had a nervous breakdown, right?
Cathy finds the room with the bed sheets she moved before Vivian joins her. Because it's the 1970s, George doesn't know what to do when Vivian's soup is boiling.
Hold on, darling. Your women are coming to your rescue.
This is where we see some of the differences between the two versions of the film. In the director's cut, Cathy sits with her soup and recites Jack and Jill over and over and over again until her mother snaps at her to stop. In the original release, Cathy doesn't repeat the nursery rhyme, so when Vivian yells at her, it comes seemingly at random. After, Vivian tells George that she feels like someone is watching them from the garden, so he goes out to check. There, he encounters 3 children, Walter, Peter, and Geraldine, their new neighbors. Their mother, Margaret Burton, arrives to collect them. Vivian and Margaret exchange greetings and make plans for the children to stop by the next day to play with Cathy. George finding the kids, as well as this greeting, is completely cut from the initial release, so when the kids show up the following day, there is absolutely zero reference to who they are, why they're in the yard with Cathy, or who this stranger is that's visiting Vivian. The next day, apparently, the movie does not make that clear at all, Cathy explores more of the house. She goes upstairs and we watch her open up several doors in real time before she stumbles upon the attic. She touches a bunch of nasty cobwebbed statues and eventually finds a raggedy old doll with its eyes stitched shut.
Why don't you want to see anymore?
She also finds a portrait of Laura, the little girl from the beginning of the movie, and its eyes start to glow green. Vivian searches for Cathy upstairs, having the door shut by itself practically in her hands. This is the first of several times that Vivian experiences something supernatural and then just completely ignores it. She pulls on the jammed door a few times before Cathy walks out with the doll. Some expert foreshadowing insists that something must be done about the door.
I have to oil this, otherwise someone might get locked in there.
Nothing happens with this. This plot point goes nowhere. Later that day, Cathy plays outside with the kids from next door, and Vivian visits with Margaret. She has for some reason brought along her friend Agatha, and the movie wastes no time telling you that this character is a medium.
Agatha is a medium.
Which is why she's so attracted to all things.
That's why I'm so attracted to all things.
Agatha insists that she can prove that she's basically magic, and Vivian hands her a portrait of George's father, the man from the beginning of the movie. She experiences some rapid editing from the beginning of the film, and sees the car crash firsthand. This is all cross-cut with Cathy and the neighbors playing a rousing game called Accident?
How about accident?
She delegates roles such as the little girl and the dad, before she preaches from the Meninist Manifesto.
All women are bitches, repeat. All women are bitches.
She talks them through the car crash, and it all culminates with Cathy stabbing one of the kids in the eye with a needle. The screams from outside snap Agatha out of her medium powers and draws the women outside. A true Canadian, Margaret thanks Vivian for the coffee, despite her child having just been stabbed in the face.
Anyway, thanks for the coffee.
Agatha downright swaggers her way out of the house, as if she didn't just watch a man and child burn to death in her mind, and thanks Vivian for having her over. These two are best friends now, because Margaret never returns, and this random Agatha character hovers around for a solid chunk of the remaining runtime. Vivian reaches down to grab Cathy's hand, and she gets pricked by the same needle, but that's fine, she just ignores it. Cathy was played by 10-year-old Randy Allen, who had done some commercial work prior to Cathy's curse, and her mother was hired on to work in the wardrobe department, since she was going to be on set every day anyway. That night, George fixes his first love, the statue. He hears barking from outdoors and steps outside to check on this Doberman named Sneaker. This is Paul the handyman's dog, and she definitely isn't going to have something bad happen to her. After that, it's time for some tasteful 1970s intercourse. They mingle their way into the bedroom, but are interrupted by Cathy screaming and headbanging in the next room. They bring her the doll, and she falls right back to sleep. The next morning, Vivian heads out to do some laundry and leaves Cathy with Mary. Cathy passes the mirror in her room, but we see that her reflection is of Laura. We've got a possession on our hands. Or a curse, I guess. Laura Cathy comes down the stairs and chooses violence immediately as she absolutely mollywops her father's first love with her mind. Man, that poor statue can't catch a break. Set safety in the 70s wasn't as stringent as it is today. Eddie Madelon was wondering how he was going to get this effect done, but realized that Canada was a land practically bursting at the seams with hunters. So he took a page out of William Friedkin's book and just straight up shot the damn thing with a rifle. Having not had her fill of destruction just yet, Cathy sits down for breakfast and full-on throws her cereal bowl straight at the wall. Completely unfazed, Mary kneels down and cleans up the entire mess.
There, it's all done.
Wait, it's all done? Is she kidding? How did that make it into the movie? Later that day, poor delusional Mary finds Cathy's doll nestled in the curtains for some reason. She looks on with disdain before Cathy shows up and does her best Lar Park Lincoln impression. This effect was accomplished simply with a fishing rod. The crew did a few takes until they got one that looked believable. Having seen Laura's true power, our friend Mary's time has come. Cathy holds the doll out in front of her and encroaches on the housekeeper. She backs up and covers her ears, probably to avoid hearing the reviews for this movie, and falls out the window, right in front of Vivian, who's just returned home. Cathy scampers away, and they call the police. The coroners take the body away, and a detective played by Sonny Forbes, who had parts in David Cronenberg's Shivers, RABID, and Scanners, interrogates a distraught Vivian. She tells them that she saw Cathy in the window after she saw Mary fall.
My baby!
The detective then does some investigating involving the dog, and asks George if he plans on leaving the city. He tells George that he'll report his findings to him before heading out. This detective isn't featured in the rest of the film, and this plot point also goes nowhere. George comforts Cathy, and then they flat out steal that shot from The Omen. You know that now famous shot of Damien staring straight down the lens and smiling? Yeah, they just do that one. We get some dreadfully 70s dialogue when George doesn't know where to find the frying pan and has to be directed by Cathy.
I think that is called woman's intuition.
They make food for a distraught Vivian, who's upstairs resting in bed, and Cathy brings it to her. But she stops halfway, and we get this wild, out-of-nowhere stop-motion sequence wherein Cathy stares off at who knows what, and the food rapidly ages and the milk turns to blood. She keeps walking into the bedroom, but in the very next shot, the food is all back to normal. So what the hell was even the point? Did Laura Cathy rapidly age and de-age the food just for fun? Just for the audience? Either way, she sets the tray down on the nightstand, and Vivian startles awake, scaring Cathy and ending the scene, so the food doesn't even get eaten. The next day, Vivian tries to converse with Cathy on the stairs, but her daughter uses a wicked musical sting to just teleport away. She reappears at the bottom of the stairs, and rather than be even remotely confused or surprised by how she got there, Vivian's just pissed off. Cathy teleports again, this time back to the top of the stairs, and in true 70s parenting fashion, Vivian just continues scolding her as if she didn't just magically reappear somewhere else right in front of her eyes. Eventually, Cathy has enough of her mother's accusations and just earthquakes the entire house, traumatizing Vivian and sending her into one of her famous nervous breakdowns. Vivian gets sent off to the hospital and George goes to work, leaving Cathy with Paul, the handyman. Remember him? Yeah, he's in this movie. Later that night, a car pulls up to the front of the house. It's Agatha. She's also still in the movie, and she just strolls right in through the front door. This scene probably plays out differently now than it did in the late 70s, but Agatha comes across Paul, absolutely hammered, with Cathy on his lap, a bottle of whiskey in her hands. Young Randy Allen couldn't keep herself from laughing at Roy Witham's drunken acting, so parts of this scene took upwards of 20 takes. Because this movie came out after the success of The Exorcist, the strange duo ruthlessly hurl insults towards the medium.
Fat whore!
Until she leaves. Paul stumbles his way into the kitchen and sits down at the table and continues drinking. Cathy sits on the counter across from him and uses her extremely loosely defined powers to slide open a drawer full of snakes, spiders, and rats that crawl and slither all over her caretaker. Look at that goofy face. How can you be scared of that?
Don't you like it, good old Paul?
These were all real animals on loan from a local pet store, and actor Roy Witham opted to not use a stunt double for any of the shots. He was told that if he didn't move too much, then none of the animals would hurt him. They got the scene in one day, and while they were wrapping, they realized they had actually misplaced one of the snakes. It likely escaped into the walls of the house, which was a rental. That night, Sneaker's barking keeps Cathy awake, so she puts on a happy face and I guess psychic powers it to death? It's the 70s, surely you didn't think the dog was going to make it. This upsets Paul, who drunkenly tries to steal and burn Cathy's doll. When he eventually does get a hold of it, it viciously slices his hand open. A car pulls up to the front of the house. It's Agatha again. Why the hell does she keep coming back here? She's known Vivian for like 5 minutes. Vivian's voice guides her through the house up to the attic, but a dramatic Bond villain chair spin reveals that it was Cathy all along. And she killed Sneaker too. Cathy's psychic powers, or curse or whatever, conjures up an older version of Agatha, and the even stranger duo launch even more insults at the original.
Medium? I'd say extra rare piece of shit!
This is where in a competent script the foreshadowing of the door not opening would come into play, but not here. The two berate Agatha until she runs unencumbered out of the house and finally out of the movie. This character only existed to show us a flashback that we had just seen, and then be insulted by a 10-year-old. A car pulls up to the front of the house. George has brought Vivian home from the hospital, nervous breakdown concluded. The next day, Cathy visits the local park with a bunch of random kids, before being enticed by the pond in the center. She gazes in, wondering, who is this girl I see, staring straight back at me? The reflection mesmerizes her and leads her out into the open water, but New Orleans is sinking, man, and she don't want to swim. This was the first shot of the production, and because the ice on the pond was so thin, the crew determined that they would only get one take, so they set up 2 cameras. The smallest wetsuit the crew had on hand was still too big for Randy Allen, the young actor playing Cathy, so they stuffed it with padding to help fill it out. When she fell into the water, however, the padding actually caused her to float, which is why her hair is still dry when actor Alan Scarfy lifts her out of the pond. They shot all the underwater segments through portholes at a local pool because an underwater camera was nowhere near in the budget. That night, a car pulls up to the front of the house. Their eventful day at the pond concluded, George carries the soggy Cathy inside.
Will you look at her? Just look at her.
The next morning, Vivian decides to have an aquatic adventure of her own, as her bathwater turns bright red, the crew mixed it with pig's blood, and she scrambles to swipe off all the leeches that are now spontaneously all over her. I would be amiss if I didn't mention the similarity to Barbara Steele's bathtub scene in Shivers. George leaves Cathy and the clearly distraught Vivian in Paul's care and heads to work. The handyman tends to a delirious Vivian who mumbles about saving Cathy by burning her doll. Paul goes to leave, but he is intercepted by Laura Cathy. He slowly backs down the stairs before he's attacked by... What? What even was that? A lens flare? Okay, well that bizarre lighting effect slices Paul's chest open. This intense sound effect wakes Vivian enough to look out the window, but she doesn't have time to put her contacts in, so her POV is this insanely out of focus shot of Paul and Cathy. She staggers her way outside and literally trips onto his body. She's too late to save him, of course, as Cathy has turned poor Paul's face into nothing more than red paint and a gumball. The oil in the Panavision cameras from LA was not designed for Canadian winters and kept freezing, forcing the crew to constantly shift from exteriors to interiors. Now, if you've ever shot outside in the cold, or if you've ever worn glasses outside in the cold and then moved inside, you know that the rapid temperature change causes major condensation on the glass, which can take forever to dissipate. This chewed up a lot of time from the crew's already airtight schedule. Vivian moves inside for the final confrontation with Cathy. She stumbles her way into her daughter's room and comes face to face with Cathy's final form.
My name is Laura.
Sorry, Laura's final form. This makeup took 4 hours to apply, which Randy Allen was fine with. At least until she saw herself in the mirror for the first time, which absolutely mortified her. Vivian slowly walks up to Cathy and straight yoinks the doll out of her daughter's hands like she's taking candy from a baby. I guess we're to assume that Paul must have caught an edge when he took it. This results in a short fight scene edited like a Bourne film, culminating in Vivian being thrown down the stairs. Beverly Murray and Randy Allen both walked away with several bruises after this little scuffle, as the young actor was, quote, a little overexuberant. A car pulls up to the front of the house, for the last time. We're in the endgame now. It's George, home late from work. He tries the front door, but it's locked. He runs around to the back, stealing a glance at Paul's body. He shatters the back window and crawls through, getting a horrifying view of his daughter's grotesque visage. Vivian rips the stitches off the doll's eyes, and I guess that breaks the curse, because Cathy then returns to normal, but not before the house earthquakes one more time. The crew shot up the set again to get these destruction effects. In fact, in this shot of the mirror shattering, you can actually see Randy Allen lowering her hands from her ears a little too early, and then getting startled by the sound of the gunshot. To clarify, these are live rounds on an interior set with a child actor present. The family all stares at one another, literally trying not to burst out laughing, and almost failing. We get a shot of the doll, which is now crying blood for some reason, and then the movie just ends. It just ends. Why was the source of the possession or curse or whatever centered around this doll? How did the doll not get burned in the car accident? Who brought the doll back? Who stitched the doll's eyes shut? What's the deal with the portrait upstairs? Why did George's mom leave and only take one of her kids? The movie doesn't care about your questions. Its 90 minutes are up. Thanks for buying a ticket. Cathy's Curse is a shining example of everything the infamous tax shelter era had to offer. Though we did get some true Canadian horror classics, such as George Mahalka's My Bloody Valentine or Peter Medak's The Changeling, both of which I'll get to, these were without a doubt outliers in the formula. By the end of 1982, the capital cost allowance had been drastically reduced from 100% down to 50%, and just like that, the experiment was mercifully ended, though it did leave its mark on Canada's horror history. Until next time, I've been RJ, this has been Killer Canuck, and thanks for watching. Hey folks, RJ here. Thanks for watching this episode of Killer Canuck. Just want to give a huge thanks to the folks at RUE MORGUE for hosting this series on their channel. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RealKillerCanuck. If you like the tune playing in the background, be sure to check out Prodigy on SoundCloud and over at noiserecords.com. There'll be a link in the description below. Let me know if there's a Canadian horror film that you think I should cover. I hope everyone has a safe and happy Halloween. Until next time.